Phantasy Star Online 2 is going to be releasing in the US soon, after 8 years of Japanese exclusivity, and after playing on the Japanese servers for as long as I have, I couldn't be more excited to experience the game all over again with a brand new audience. But as excited as I am for PSO2 to release in the West, I figured it would be fun if I took a look back and shared exactly why Phantasy Star Online is such an important franchise to me.
5 seconds, it'll be the new year. In 20 seconds. And we're going to count it down from here down when we get to 10. Are you ready? Happy New Year early. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy 2000!
The year 2000 was transformative for me for a lot of reasons. I was 14 years old, and it was the dawn of the new millennium. The future was here. But I had just moved from Georgia to Florida, a whole new state, leaving all my old friends and family, my old school, and everything I'd known behind. It was also the dawn of a new era of video gaming. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 had come out, which ended up shaping how I experienced music in my teenage years. Final Fantasy IX released, and it was a phenomenal look at friendship and mortality. And Pokemon Gold and my Game Boy Color was where I spent time with all my best friends, Feraligatr, Espeon, and Ninetales. But the real transformative experience was receiving a Dreamcast as a Christmas gift at the tail end of the year. The Dreamcast had come out in September of 1999, and it was already on the way out when I got mine. But that didn't stop it from being an amazing experience, far above the graphical capabilities of the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. It was a showpiece, a game console with such high-fidelity graphics that no one minded if I was playing Sonic Adventure on the living room television. Over the course of the next couple of months, I would get a few more games: Soul Calibur, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Crazy Taxi, and House of the Dead 2. I also had a demo disc that I got tons of mileage out of, specifically because I had a limited version of Power Stone. But there was a locally owned game store near where I lived, and I spent way too much time there. I'd trade and swap my games constantly, and one day in early 2001, they had gotten a brand new game in stock and they offered me a deal on it. That game was Phantasy Star Online. RPGs weren't new for me. I'd played Final Fantasy games before, but Phantasy Star Online was such an eye-opening experience. Everything was moving in real time. It didn't rely on turn-based combat. I had direct influence over my actions, not picking anything from a menu. I could level up my character and level up my skills, but it was closer to an action game. PSO had some really awesome theming too. It wasn't set in a medieval fantasy world or a weird dystopian future like Final Fantasy 7 or 8. It was set in a colorful and bright cyberpunk-style space-age environment with upbeat and fun music that belied a strange and fantastical, dark storyline. Your planet is dying, so your government decides to take off into space in 2 waves and colonize another inhabitable planet. The first wave of colonists, on a ship called Pioneer 1, finds a suitable planet called Ragol, and starts to build a new life there. They then send a signal to the rest of the refugees, who board the ship Pioneer 2 and head towards the new planet. But right as they get there and establish contact, a huge explosion rocks the central dome of the colony on the planet and all contact is lost. You play as a hunter, a member of an exploratory group meant to find out what happened to the colony, and especially what happened to Rico, the daughter of Principal Tyrell, the de facto leader of the Pioneer 2 expedition. You can choose from one of 3 races: humans, your standard everyday regular guy; Newmans, which are an elf-like race that were artificially created in a lab to be good at using magic techniques; or castes, a sentient robot race that was made to be good at using weapons but unable to use magic. Those 3 races can choose from a handful of classes: Hunter, which is your basic swordsman that can use a few lower level techniques; Ranger, a class that's good at using guns and rifles; or Forces, a class that's excellent at using magic but is physically weak. You choose from 9 preset gender-locked class combinations and customize their appearance, outfit, and name, and once you're done, you get assigned a section ID, which affects what loot you'll get throughout the game. And loot is what Phantasy Star Online is really known for. You'll pick up weapons, armor, and items that drop randomly from enemies in boxes, and there are a ton of different types of weapons that you can pick up too. For instance, as a hunter, you start with a saber, a single target blade, but you can pick up a sword, which is slower but hits all enemies in front of you, or a dagger, a short-range weapon that hits more times but for lower damage. There's also lots of statistics to balance as well, like damage and accuracy, but there's also a very important statistic that lets you deal more damage to enemies of a certain type. Getting a weapon with a high percentage to certain enemy affinities can do tons more damage. There's a fairly decent amount of depth to the game, but when I played it for the first time, I was mostly just excited to see all the different weapons there were in the game. I still remember the first rare item I got, the Dragon Slayer sword. In the original Dreamcast version of the game, it looked just like a regular greatsword, but rather than being a single color, it would pulse between 3 different colors, and it looked amazing. In later versions of the game, it had a unique skin that looked like a dragon's tooth forged into a blade. The chase for loot is what really drove me to play the game more and more. The mystery and wonder of what items could possibly be out there kept me playing for hundreds of hours, despite the lack of content in the game. See, the original release of PSO on Dreamcast had only 4 areas: the forest, the caves, the mines, and the ruins, with a total of 11 different maps between them. While there were a handful of layouts and spawn points for each one of the maps, traveling through them was mostly the same every single time. The basic game flow on the original version had you traveling through each area and taking out each boss, then before fighting the final boss you had to go through each area one more time and activate a tower that would open a door to the final teleporter. Take out that boss, and then you earn the right to take on the game again, but at a higher difficulty. The higher the difficulty, the faster the enemies move and the more damage they deal, but they also drop better and rarer loot. After you beat it on hard, you can put it on another difficulty, very hard. In the Dreamcast version 2 release and in later releases on other platforms that I'll be talking about later, you can also play on ultimate difficulty, which adds even more variations by mixing up not just loot, but also introduces new enemies and new enemy behaviors to keep you on your toes. But even with that lack of content, PSO still managed to keep me busy for years and years. Those 4 maps are ingrained in my psyche. Every pathway and nook and cranny and secret area is etched into my memory as if Raggle was my hometown. It's so familiar and comfortable, and it brings warm nostalgic feelings every time I hear that familiar forest theme. What's funny is that I distinctly remember sitting down and playing the game and feeling that the music wasn't that memorable and there was nothing really catchy about it, instead opting to listen to my CDs of Papa Roach and System of a Down while cutting down all these enemies. But nowadays I can go back and listen to the music and hum along with it, and even then, a track that was added in the version 2 update for Dreamcast became one of my favorite pieces of video game music of all time, the song called Trick Track, which is basically a remix of music pieces from the original Phantasy Star games on Master System and Genesis. It's incredible, and it really goes to show that while the game isn't related to the originals outside of some references, that the team still had some reverence for the original games. The rest of the music in the game is moody and atmospheric. It fits the flavor of each zone while still fitting the overall spacefaring sci-fi aesthetic. The best part of the music, though, is that there's a calm version and a battle version of each zone's background theme, making for a very dynamic soundtrack. Every single track, be it an atmospheric track or a boss battle, just oozes character. It makes the game just that much better. But music and aesthetics and all that aside, the game does have a level of depth in its gameplay. Every one of the multiple varieties of weapons in the game has a 3-hit timed combo. Pressing the button at the right time after a hit will allow you to swing a second and then a third time, with each subsequent hit gaining accuracy. There are also 3 different types of weapon attacks: normal, strong, and special, with normal attacks coming out fastest, strong attacks having a short wind-up before the hit goes off, and then special attacks taking slightly longer, but also having an additional effect based on the weapon's element if it has one. For instance, heat weapons will burn the enemies, freeze weapons will encase the enemy in ice, shock weapons will paralyze them, and dark weapons will instantly kill minor enemies if you can ever get the special attack to hit. Special attacks have lower accuracy than normal attacks, and by putting them at the end of a 3-hit combo, you have the highest chance of them taking effect. Bladed weapons, while more powerful, require you to be in the fray near enemies, so they're not as safe as using ranged weapons, and there's also techniques, which are this game's analog for magic. And there are quite a few techniques in the game. Foe, the fire spell, Barda, the ice spell, Zande, the lightning spell, Grants, the light element spell, Megid, the dark spell, Resta, the healing spell, and Anti, the status restorative spell. Much like the Final Fantasy series, there are also stronger versions of those spells with added prefixes. For instance, the base level fire skill is Foe, which fires a single fireball, but the higher level spell is G-Foe, which casts a ring of fire around the caster, and then the highest level spell is Ray-Foe, which is basically an explosion on an enemy that hits everything around it. Most techniques will always hit the enemy, unlike weapons or guns, but they require TP, or technique points, to cast. You level up your techniques by using discs, which makes the spell larger and do more damage, but also makes the spell cost more TP. The only ways to regenerate TP is by either healing at the hospital in the Pioneer 2 lobby, finding a regeneration station out in the field, or by using items, so forces usually carry a ton of restorative items in their bag. There's also another way to get your character stronger, and it's called a mag. A mag is a little flying, biomechanical creature that hovers around your character's shoulder at all times, and it provides you with stat boosts. You can feed it items 3 at a time to increase these stat boosts, and with every bonus point granted, your mag levels up. Feeding it a certain way or giving it a certain rare item will make it evolve into a special form, and it also grants it a new ability called a Photon Blast, the effect of which can range from a ring of damage around the player to healing and reviving all party members. Your mag can also cast special abilities on you like invincibility or a strength and defense buff, but those happen at random and can't be counted on. Though it is quite nice to take a big hit from a boss and have your mag cast invincibility on you, giving you an opportunity to utterly lay into said boss and not have to worry about it hurting you or staggering you. And all of these systems combined give the game depth. A depth that wouldn't be seen at first glance. While PSO does have only 4 stages, 4 bosses, and a handful of enemies, it's the combination of all of these systems and the feeling of upgrading your character and getting stronger and stronger that makes the game so addictive and so much fun. But then I haven't really talked about the elephant in the room. Phantasy Star Online has that third tricky word in its name, online. Back in 2001, the internet was still a strange and foreign concept to me. We didn't have proper broadband support at home until around 2006, which is after I graduated high school and started working full time. But in 2001, my meager grocery store income was enough to fund a $10 a month subscription to my local dial-up ISP. I didn't get a ton of time to play online though, as my home phone was usually tied up all day and my parents were pretty strict about me going to bed at a reasonable hour, but I did spend a couple of late summer nights and winter holidays playing PSO. It was a marvelous, world-changing feeling, being able to talk to people and play a game together with people I'd never met. It was my first real online game, aside from random forum games like Neopets. That other hunter in the game, that was a real person. He congratulated me on rare drops, he handed me things he couldn't use, and he revived me if I died in battle. We communicated using symbol chat and automatically translated phrases, so even if he didn't speak English, it was still as if he was sitting in the room next to me playing along. It's a feeling that, to this day, no other game has ever captured for me, simply because the internet has become an ever-present being. It's a fact of life nowadays that the other people you're seeing online are actually real people, so much so that it catches people by surprise if the other people in games aren't real people, like in games like PUBG Mobile or Mario Kart World Tour. But back in 2001, there wasn't anything else like it unless you were on PC. Sure, there were games like EverQuest that showed cooperative RPGs could work, but on console, the only online offerings had been things like the X-Band modem, which allowed you to play networked matches of competitive games like Mortal Kombat 2 with other players that had the same hardware, but those were niche, expensive, and required a huge monetary investment to get started. The Dreamcast had a modem built in, and it came with a web browser disk. It was ready to go out of the box. Phantasy Star Online showed me what was possible with gaming and made me genuinely excited about the future, but it also opened my eyes to the dark side of gaming as well, in a way that I'd never been exposed to. You've probably noticed that I've been mentioning 2 versions of Phantasy Star Online for the Dreamcast. The first version had the level cap set to 100, only had difficulties up to very hard, and contained no other modes. But there was a second version, called appropriately enough Phantasy Star Online version 2, that came out later that same year. It added ultimate difficulty, a primitive PvP versus mode, a puzzle-like challenge mode, updated weapon skins, and a level 200 cap. But it also had 2 more very important features: better anti-cheat methods and a serial key that tied your console to your save file. On 2 separate days, I had 2 completely different and polar opposite experiences playing PSO. The first one, I was chatting with someone and I told him that I was kind of new to playing online and I might not have any good gear, so I was scared to play with very many people for fear of being a burden to them. So he brought me into the game, and he dropped literally hundreds of different weapons on the ground. Rare items I'd never seen before, things like the Chainsaw, which was basically a great sword with a chainsaw blade, the Egg Blaster weapon, which was a handgun that looked like it was made by Eggman from Sonic the Hedgehog, and the Lavis Cannon, which wasn't a gun at all, but instead was an amazing sword that shot out a wave that damaged enemies in front of me. He also dropped a mag that was fully maxed out, 200 in each stat, that I thought was impossible. I quickly grabbed all that I could, thanked him, and I left the game. I went offline for a bit to play around with the new weapons, and I had a ton of fun utterly stomping enemies that I had trouble with before. I grinded through all of my quests with ease, and I made it all the way up to around level 80 or so before getting back online again. As much fun as I was having with the weapons, someone told me that I shouldn't be using them because they were hacked. I was taken aback. There was no way they were hacked. Someone was just generous and gave them to me. But no, the Lavis Cannon and the Egg Blaster were both in the game files, but they weren't actually implemented yet, and it wouldn't be until version 2 that those items would actually be obtainable. The unfortunate part, though, was that it didn't matter that I had these weapons. A couple of days later, while playing online, a random person joined my game and then started counting down. When he reached 0, for some reason I was kicked offline, prompting my game to save. When I rebooted the game and went to load my character, it was completely missing, replaced by the skin of an NPC called Kyrique. I made another character, went online, and tried to get caught back up, but nearly the exact same thing happened again, only this time my character was replaced by another NPC called Noel. This was when I gave up on playing the game online altogether, having lost 2 characters that I'd invested a great deal of time in. Later, I went back to my local game store and bought a copy of version 2, hoping that the hacking issues were fixed and I could play online once again. But once I got home, I found out that Sega was charging $5 a month for a hunter's license to play online, so I never connected my Dreamcast to PSO servers ever again, refusing to pay money just to have my characters deleted just like before. That's not the end of the PSO story for me, however. I kept playing my copy of version 2 offline, though never making it to ultimate mode and seeing the true final boss thanks to the time investment required and the sheer difficulty of the task. But a few years later, I get a second chance thanks to the release of the game for the Nintendo GameCube. This release came with updated graphics, 3 new character classes, bug fixes, and oodles of new content, including an entire new episode of the game. New maps, new enemies, new loot, new bosses, and this time you could play the entire game cooperatively offline with split screen mode. I have very fond memories of playing this game with 4 players, carrying my memory card with me just so I could play at different people's houses. The episode 2 content was a game changer though. Not only was it more areas that you could play through, but it also had a new story, essentially making this a completely different game. While the first 2 levels, the VR Temple and the VR Spaceship, actually used remixed assets from PSO version 2 on Dreamcast, with the Temple and Spaceship actually having been versus mode maps and the enemies in those 2 maps all being from episode 1 aside from the bosses. The seabed, central control area, and control tower zones were all brand new and feature completely new enemies. The GameCube version was fantastic, but I still never played it as much as I did the Dreamcast version. While the GameCube had modem support, the initial cost to get one was way too high. It was $30 for the modem, $10 a month for dial-up internet, and $5 a month for a subscription fee to the game, and from what I've been told, hacking was just as bad on the GameCube version as it was on the Dreamcast version. So I never bothered getting online with the GameCube version, but I still had bunches of fun playing locally with my friends. Later on, they'd release PSO Episode 3, but that was a weird card battling game that didn't scratch the same itch as its traditional game. I did rent it once, but I never owned a copy of Episode 3. It would be another 2 years before I had a chance to play Phantasy Star Online with other people on the internet again. In 2005, I randomly stumbled across a banner ad for a game called Phantasy Star Online Blue Burst, which was a brand new version of PSO for Windows PCs. It had all of the content from the GameCube version, but had one additional feature that made it extremely appealing to me. All of the characters were stored server-side, which meant no one could hack or delete my character, and I wouldn't have to worry about restarting all over again. I was so excited about being able to play PSO again that on my way home from work that same day, I bought a wired Xbox 360 gamepad to replace my other cheap controller that I use for emulators, just so I could have a comfortable controller to play with. I spent a ton of time on Blue Burst, even though it had a subscription fee and everything. I didn't mind. It was $5 a month that I was happy to spend if it meant that I got to play PSO again. The servers were almost constantly packed with people, and the fact that I had a keyboard at the ready meant that it was much easier to communicate with others while we were playing. The big surprise with Blue Burst was that they had added even more content to the game, Episode 4. A brand new story and a new map was added that came complete with more loot and even more bosses. It was incredible, as it felt like I was playing the definitive version of the game at last. But more trouble arose, this time not from hackers but from Sega themselves. Shortly after Episode 4's release, Sega stopped paying as much attention to the US and European servers for Blue Burst. Holidays would either fail to launch or never be taken down, and bugs were reported frequently that were fixed in the Japanese version of the game, but not in the US version. One of the moderators for the game, Ruby Eclipse, was the social manager for the forums, the person in charge of telling Sega of our issues and giving us their responses, and he was unfortunately the punching bag for most of the forum, as a sort of outlet for our frustrations. I mean, who else were we going to yell at to complain that the Christmas decorations were up in lobbies for almost a full year? Sega shut down the Western Blue Burst servers after 3 years of operation, but the Japanese servers stayed up until 2010 before finally going down as well. When they went down, that was the last time that Phantasy Star Online ever had an official server. That's not to say that there aren't plenty of private servers for the game, however. You can still, to this day, download Phantasy Star Online Blue Burst and play it online with hundreds of other people, which is a pretty satisfying testament to how enthusiastic people are about PSO. While Sega has gone on to make other games in the Phantasy Star series, like Phantasy Star Universe, Phantasy Star Portable on the PSP, Phantasy Star Zero on the DS, and eventually Phantasy Star Online 2, none of these games have captured the same feeling as much as playing PSO on Dreamcast back in 2001. It was, and still is, a phenomenal game with an addictive core gameplay loop, and it's just as satisfying to play now as it was back then. Phantasy Star Online's playstyle also influenced the way that I approach playing other games as well, and is likely the reason why I enjoy playing grindy multiplayer games like Monster Hunter as much as I do. There's just something fun about gathering a couple of friends and spending some time working towards a greater goal together that just feels really nice. Thankfully, since PSO 2 is launching in the West soon, I'll be able to capture that same feeling with a brand new group of people, new friends, new community, and a lot of new players that have probably never even heard of Phantasy Star Online. It'll be a fantastic experience for everyone. I may take a closer look at Phantasy Star Universe and Phantasy Star Online 2 a little later, but I feel like this video is long enough. It was a good way for me to vent out all these nostalgic feelings that I've been having lately, and it was a good opportunity to talk about one of my favorite games ever. One that utterly changed the way I play and think about games as a whole. In fact, it was the way that PSO played that made me enjoy playing Destiny as much as I did when it came out in 2014. A game set in space with cool weapons and space wizards, where you do missions set in variations of the same 4 maps over and over again, following a vague storyline, all the while chasing better and better loot. Sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? Oh, and by the way, remember that moderator I mentioned earlier, Ruby Eclipse? His name is Aaron Weber, and he's the social media and PR manager for Sega, and the guy that runs the @SonicTheHedgehog Twitter account. Talk about a glow-up, am I right? If he hadn't been such an awesome moderator for those forums, I doubt he would have gotten as much attention as he needed to get his position at Sega today. Anyway, thanks for joining me on this nostalgic ride. I hope you liked the video. If you did, feel free to hit the little subscribe button and get notified as soon as I upload a new video. Or you can check out my live streams of PSO2, among other games, at twitch.tv/QBlockGaming. You can also support me on Patreon too if you want to. Links are in the description. Thanks again, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.